It's time for the All Things Strange podcast. We are your hosts, Agent ETA
and Agent Anderson. Come along as we examine UFO sightings, conspiracies, and all things strange. You can check out all of our wonderful links in the description on the Linktree, where you can find merchandise, our Discord link where we do our live shows currently, and more. Don't forget to check out Patreon, where you can find bonus episodes and stuff like that. This week's episode, the 27 Club. As chosen by our Patreon subscribers, we've got 3 wonderful tiers. The first tier will get you early access and after hours. The second tier will get you bonus episodes. And the third tier will allow you to vote on upcoming topics such as this one, the 27 Club. This has been on the list for a long time. It's kind of weird.
Yeah. I mean, I remember hearing about the 27 Club when I was very young, and it's always kind of interested me. I always thought it was an odd kind of thing. It maybe just a coincidence, maybe not, but we'll get into it, you know?
Yeah. Well, without any further ado, I guess, let's get into it. All right, what are we talking about here? The 27 Club. Many musicians and other celebrities, but this one usually is referring to musicians. A lot of them seem to die at the age of 27. Kind of weird. Some people say it's just a coincidence, but is there more to it? Perhaps some of these unfortunate souls made a deal with the devil. Some names you might recognize or may not, depending on, maybe not. Some of these are a little older, such as Brian Jones, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, and his girlfriend, who inherited his estate, Amy Winehouse, and many, many more, all died at the age of 27. And at some point, when you look at the long list of names, it starts to look like more than just a coincidence. But who knows? Nobody knows where the idea or the legend of the 27 Club started. A lot of people say that it became a thing with Kurt Cobain's death. I'm not going to call it a suicide, people. I'm just not going to, even though that's how it's often referred to online. But it started with his death, and it grew from there. People say it grew online or whatever. But as far as I can tell, the idea had been out there before Kurt Cobain. It just wasn't popularly talked about. I mean, it wasn't...
Yeah. And it wasn't called the 27 Club for a while, you know, like up until around Kurt Cobain's death, from what I understand.
Yeah.
But one of the earlier mentions that I had seen was in the magazine The Rolling Stones, and in 1969, and it was referring to the one of the founding members of the Rolling Stones, Brian Jones, and they talk about his death in the magazine, and it was mentioned how he's not the only 27-year-old musician that has died at that age.
Yeah, when you have so many of them dying at the age of 27, people are going to notice whether or not they call it the 27 Club or not. It's just kind of a strange detail. But yeah, Kurt Cobain, 27 Club. I didn't list him when I said all the other names above, but he was also in the club. The first victim of the club that we know about, or member, I guess, first member of the club was a fella named Alexander Levy, who was a composer, pianist, and conductor. He lived from 1864 and perished in 1892. He was a Brazilian guy, and he was famous for a fusion of Brazilian folk music and classical music. The cause of his death is unknown. So that's the earliest one that I could find, and that's going back quite a ways. And I wonder if you dig through the records, you might find more that are earlier than that, but that's, short of having access to some kind of library records or something,
Yeah, with how many deaths of especially musicians, it seems to be like this whole 27 Club is like saturated with like mostly musicians. I'm sure there's actors and stuff too, but most of them seem to be musicians. So I don't know, maybe it's a a Robert Jones type, or I'm sorry, Robert Johnson type deal where he sold his soul to the devil in order to be able to play blues.
Yeah. Well, that's actually the first guy I was going to talk about. There's so many people that we could not possibly talk about all of them, but there are a couple of prominent individuals that I think are worth mentioning. The first is Robert Johnson. We've talked about him before. We did an episode on the devil and music or something. I forget what we called it, but we did an episode talking about people who may or may not have sold their souls to the devil. And Robert Johnson is probably the most famous of these by far.
Yeah.
He's the king of the Delta blues. If you've never heard of him, do yourself a favor after you listen to this awesome podcast and go look him up. I'm sure you can find his music on Spotify or on YouTube or something. And he's really good, but his music is a little different than what you might be used to. He plays the blues, but he does really weird stuff. Like sometimes he'll miss a beat from a measure, or he'll add a beat or something. It's really hard to describe his style. It's blues, but it's also Robert Johnson. There's nobody else like him. He was born in 1911, and his recordings influenced many, many musicians ever since he started playing until even today. People are still influenced by him. One of the most, according to a guy named Eric Clapton, who you might have heard of, he's one of the most influential musicians of the 20th century. So Eric Clapton, Bob Dylan, Keith Richards, Robert Plant, and many more have all cited him as a major influence. And a lot of these people have also covered his songs. One of my favorites is Love in Vain by the Rolling Stones, but there are many...
Great remake.
Yeah. There are many, many others, such as Traveling Riverside Blues by Led Zeppelin, Me and the Devil by The Doors, Crossroad Blues by just about everybody's done that one, I feel like. Come On in My Kitchen, Rambling on My Mind, Hellhound on My Trail, and many, many more. And if you listen to his sound, you might recognize it because it has been often borrowed or, influenced. Like if you listen to Led Zeppelin and then go listen to Robert Johnson, you'll realize there is no Led Zeppelin without Robert Johnson. Like he's such a heavy influence on their sound. For example, one of many, many examples. His most famous, or perhaps infamous, song is the Crossroad Blues, which leads people to speculate that he sold his soul to the devil at a crossroads. And it's the basis for a lot of things out there in pop culture or just culture in general. For example, I don't know if you're aware of this ETA, but they made a movie starring Ralph Macchio called Crossroads, where Ralph Macchio is a young guitarist, and he has a duel with the devil, a musical duel, as the case may be, and the devil's musical champion was Steve Vai. Come on, dude. It doesn't get any more epic than that. It was a great movie. I don't know if do you remember that one, ETA?
Yeah, for sure.
The Karate Kid.
It's been so long. It's been so long since I've seen it. Like I don't remember much of it, to be honest, but I do remember that movie.
The Karate Kid having a musical duel with Steve Vai. Come on. It's pretty good. Pretty damn good. I guess if you're willing to partake in some 80s cheese, it is one of those cheesy 80s movies, but if you're into that sort of thing, I highly recommend it. So Johnson had sort of I won't go over his whole life story because I want to talk about more than just Johnson on this episode, but he rambled about, is what they said. He would go to different towns and play music, and it's said that in each town he would have a girlfriend or a lady in each town to kind of, keep him company while he was there. He was sort of a ladies' man, I guess. He got around a lot, and that's part of his legend, and it's also part of his downfall, allegedly. The records on him are not very good. A lot of it is anecdotal by, other musicians that knew him or played with him. Well, they have stories to tell about him, but hard documentation is it's not easy to come by from this period of time. They didn't have the internet back then. And you're talking about, this just a poor guy in the South. There's not much records of him at all. Although we do have a couple of marriage certificates, 2 marriage certificates, from what I understand. What was that? Did you hear that?
Oh, don't. Yeah, that was my Xbox. I forgot to turn it off.
Oh.
It was telling me that it's going to turn off in 5 minutes.
How dare it? All right. So you might think that this guy's got 1 million albums out because of just how influential he was, but believe it or not, he only had 2 recording sessions in his life. That's it. 2 days that he recorded. And just on those 2 days, he affected everything that followed. Everything. That's just how crazy good of a guitarist this guy was. So he recorded twice in 1936 and 1937. Total of 29 songs were recorded with 13 alternate takes. There's a really weird detail from the recordings. It said that when he recorded, he wouldn't face the microphone, or I'm not sure if it was a microphone, or sometimes back then to record stuff, they actually just had sort of like, kind of like a megaphone, that would just capture the sound. I'm not sure exactly what technology was used to record him, but when he recorded, he faced the wall. He would not face the recording instrument. And the tales say that he was superstitious and he feared that the recording would actually capture his soul. So he was reluctant to record. And when they finally did get him to record, he wouldn't face the recording. He would only face the wall. Some people say maybe he just liked the way it sounded better, but I don't know about that, because I don't think they had really like live tracking where you could monitor yourself in real time. You just recorded and then you would play it back later. And since he did this both times, it's doubtful that that's the reason, because he would have no idea what the recording would sound like after the fact. So he wouldn't have that chance to go back and forth and try different recording methods. But anyways, he was apparently very superstitious. And it's crazy to think that he only recorded 2 days. He had 2 recordings. One of those wasn't even in a real recording studio. It was just in a hotel room. And based on that, he had such a heavy influence on musicians that followed him. Now, he was not a superstar during his lifetime. He did make money and he did fairly well regionally, but he was not one of these world famous musicians during his lifetime. He was only famous in local areas. But he was also had a reputation of making a decent amount of money from his gigs, and he was pretty good at getting money out of those gigs. And he spent he spent the money on alcohol and women. He was known to drink a lot and carouse with women a lot. And this is in the South, where a lot of people were Christian and a lot of people frowned on these sorts of things. And blues music in general was considered to be the devil's music, especially secular songs, which, pretty much most blues music is. So he was considered to be, kind of an unholy dude, I guess. There are stories about that where he would, try to court a lady and the parents would kick him out or chase him away or something because he was one of them evil blues musicians. It sounds silly, but that's how it was back then. But anyways, he was not super famous during his lifetime. And this is why, if you're going to make a deal with the devil, you need to be specific, because he probably just requested to be famous or good at the guitar or something. But, if he asked to be famous, he did not specify that it had to be during his lifetime. And it's kind of interesting reading about the history, because there are some people like John Hammond, who's like a record recording dude, went looking for him to have him do a concert at Carnegie Hall. He was a huge fan of his music when he heard the recordings. But by the time he was able to go look for him, Johnson was no longer alive. And this is not an isolated story. Others sought him out after he passed away, not knowing that he had died, at the young age of 27 years old. So it seems like as soon as he died, that's the moment he became famous. Ironically,
Hmm.
almost as
Which
if,
is a deal. It sounds like that's a deal the devil would make, you know?
yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah. But it's ironic too, because he made some money. He did pretty good, but he did not make life-changing mansion building dollars off of his music, but other musicians did, like the Rolling Stones, who borrowed riffs and style and songs and everything. And I'm not ripping on the Rolling Stones. I'm just saying they borrowed from him pretty heavily, as did Led Zeppelin, and they made so much money. But Johnson did not profit off of his own work the way others did. Again, maybe the way that a deal would go down if you're working with the devil. Robert Johnson's death in itself is kind of an interesting story. He died on August 16, 1938, at the age of 27, and it looks like he was poisoned. The records are kind of sketchy. He was a poor guy, and he was buried. We're not even sure where he was buried. It was probably a pauper's grave with just, the cheapest possible casket and the cheapest possible way of burying him. Hopefully he was given the respect he deserved in that. But the records are not very good for that. And the records are not good. They did not do like an autopsy. They didn't do an investigation. We just know that he died. Witnesses say that he was poisoned, that his whiskey was poisoned, and he took several days, 3 days to die, and he had a very, very painful death, excruciating, coughing up blood, hemorrhaging, in a lot of pain before he finally died. And again, if the devil's going to kill you, he's not going to do it quickly, right? He's going to make you suffer.
Hmm.
So as the story goes, Robert Johnson was playing at a piano hall, as he did. He played a lot of piano halls. Sometimes he would play on street corners or whatever. But this incident, he was playing in a piano hall, and some versions of the story say he flirted with another man's woman or wife. But it's hard to believe that somebody would murder somebody for flirting with your wife, because that sort of thing happens all the time. You never know. You never know. But the story goes that the husband owned the bar that he was playing in, and if you own a bar and your wife is there, dudes are going to be hitting her up all the time, because that's what people go to. That's like 98% of the reason why people go to bars is to hook up, right? So I find that hard to believe that he was just flirting. Probably there was a little bit of hanky-panky going on there, because Robert Johnson was known for that sort of thing. He was known to date women and go home with them and try to get a place to stay out of them. One of his friends said that he would specifically date homely women who didn't have very good options. And so he was, I don't know, he was very, very good at getting the ladies to do what he wanted them to. And he also, blues musicians in general had the reputation of being able to like mesmerize women. They didn't call it that back then, because I don't know if that was before Mesmer or not, but that's just sort of like the reputation that blues musicians had. Anyways, so he was at this bar. The husband is pissed off at him, and he orders a bottle of whiskey. So they bring him a bottle of whiskey, and the cap is open. I guess back in the day, they would bring your alcohol to your table sealed. They don't do that anymore, at least not where I live. A lot of the time, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But anyways, they brought it to him, and it had already been opened. His friend, before he went to take a drink out of the bottle, and his friend knocked it out of his hand onto the floor, and his friend said, "Hey, don't ever take a drink out of a bottle that's been opened." He's trying to help him. And Robert Johnson said, "Hey, don't ever hit a bottle of whiskey out of my hand." So he ordered another bottle, and the second bottle came with, again, the lid opened, and he drank that bottle. And I'm thinking, is this like a 750 milliliter bottle? Because I'm thinking it must be a smaller
I
bottle.
don't know.
But I didn't say anywhere. Anyways, he drank the second bottle and then he died a horrible death, from poisoning, apparently. There's different discussions that it might have been syphilis, it might have been this, it might have been that. But based on the timing and what the witnesses say, it does look like it could have been poison. Nobody knows exactly what type of poison it was. Again, they did not do an autopsy or anything like that. There are several possibilities that were widely available at the time. Some people suggested strychnine, but strychnine doesn't match his symptoms. You'd have to drink a lot of strychnine in order to die from it, apparently. Usually it would just make you sick. You would not be able to hide the taste in alcohol because it tastes and smells very strongly, and it would kill you in hours rather than days. Some people suggest that mothballs were actually dissolved in there. That would be an easier way to do it. But whatever the case, he died a very painful death, a very slow and painful death over 3 days. One idea that occurred to me is, what if this bar owner was like a serial killer, but he only killed people that flirted with his wife? You just go around killing people because, like I said, if your woman's at a bar, she's getting flirted with. There's no way around it. It's just gonna happen. So if you own a bar and your woman is there and you don't like her getting flirted with, it's almost like you're looking for trouble. So maybe this guy was a serial killer. I don't know.
I guess it's possible. I mean,
yeah, for sure. So the legend goes that Johnson sold his soul to the devil. And there are a lot of conflicting stories as to how this might have happened. The most common story that you'll hear is that he sold his soul at the crossroads. And before he did this, he was not that good at guitar. He was nothing special. And then he went away for a while, a short period of time. And then he came back, and all of a sudden, he was really, really good at the guitar. So good that it sounds like two people are playing at once. If you go listen to his recording, it's just him playing guitar and singing by himself. There's no band, there's no drummer, there's no bass player. It's just one guy playing guitar. But if you listen to it, it sounds like two people playing guitar. It's pretty wild stuff. And Eric Clapton, for example, said that he could not figure out how Johnson was able to play the stuff that he played. Like he couldn't figure out how he did it. It's like kind of crazy. There are legends that maybe he added an extra string, like a seventh string to the guitar. Maybe, I guess, I don't know. Johnson also had really long fingers, so that probably didn't hurt. But there are other people with long fingers who play guitar, so I don't know if that really explains it. But anyways, one way or another, he attained an extreme talent at playing guitar. He was really good. So there are also stories that aside from meeting the devil at the crossroads at midnight and making a bargain there's another story, other variations, for example, that he did the same thing in a graveyard. But interestingly enough, it turns out that Johnson and one of his friends named Ike Zimmerman practiced in a graveyard at night at one point because it was a quiet area and nobody would bother them there and they would not bother other people. I mean, you can imagine some musicians loudly practicing that would wake up the neighbors, probably. So that's, in a nutshell, that's the Robert Johnson myth and story. A lot of people to this day believe that he did sell his soul to the devil. I don't know. It's just a really interesting and weird story, especially the way he died and the way that he gained such an incredible amount of skill in such a short period of time. But some people are just naturally talented. All right, ETA, did you have any musicians that you wanted to talk about before I start in on Brian Jones?
I just had a long list of different musicians from different decades and like the cause of their death.
All right, let's hear some of them.
Well, I don't know if I want to necessarily. I don't know how many people are you trying to cover, because I don't want to cover it if you're covering it.
I just did notes on Brian Jones, and then that's it.
Okay, so I guess I'll rifle off a list of names here, the causes, their their birth date and their death date there, and why they supposedly passed away. So let's see, we already did Robert Johnson. The next one I have on my list is Nat Joff, and he was a swing jazz pianist. He was born January 1st, 1918, and he died August 5th, 1945, from complications of blood pressure issues. The next one is R&B singer Joe Henderson. He was born on April 24th, 1937, died on October 24th, 1964, from a heart attack. And you'll see, like throughout this whole list and stuff, like all the causes of death aren't necessarily. I mean, it's a wide array of different types of death. All kinds of different stuff. So it doesn't always seem to be the same thing. There's a wide variety of causes of why these people died. But let's see. Next one I have on my list is a lead guitarist from the band Spanky and Our Gang, Malcolm Hale. He was born on May 12th, 1941, and he died on October 31st, 1968, from carbon monoxide poisoning. So that's a different one. But yeah, there's another one. Rock and roll singer Dickie Pride was born on October 21st, 1941, and he died on March 26th, 1969, and that was from an overdose of sleeping pills. I guess that guy was addicted to the old sleeping pill and stuff. And back in those days, obviously, it's much easier to get a hold of. Well, I don't even know if it might be easy to get a hold of nowadays. I don't know, but
I don't think it'd be too difficult to get a hold of. It depends on the doctor. I sometimes have insomnia, and I had a doctor that was kind of like, all right, I'll give you a little bit of Ambien, but it's not good long term. It just causes more problems. So I don't want you to take it too much. He just wanted me to use it to get onto a sleeping pattern, basically. But I'm sure if you find the right doctor, they will prescribe you whatever. If you've if you ever looked into like modern drug epidemics, sometimes your best chance of finding a dealer is to go to your doctor.
I know, yeah, especially in recent decades with like the opioid crisis, synthetic opioids. If you're getting it from your doctor, and there's a ton of people that have ended up going on to heroin or fentanyl because they started off with Vicodin or Norco, Oxycontin, whatever.
Yeah, and I've heard that
definitely seems
like doctors they'll prescribe you some for a certain period of time, but then they'll be like, all right, I'm cutting you off right now. And they're not really good at doing like a thing where they can wean you off of it or whatever. And then the withdrawals are so horrible that people have to turn to street drugs just to avoid the atrocious withdrawals that are just really bad from these drugs.
Well, it doesn't necessarily surprise me very much that like the whole weaning off the pills or whatever, if it's just your doctor prescribing you those pills and giving you less and less. If you're already addicted to them, you're probably going to take them as fast as you can anyways. Like if you're an addict, you're an addict. Addicts have certain, habits. So, it's a lose-lose situation for anybody who gets hooked on those pills, because
maybe
if they have an addictive personality, then they're probably going to overdo it a little bit.
Maybe, not necessarily though. I was on a medication. Maybe I'll talk about it more in the after hours. But like when my doctor said, okay, well, you can just stop taking this now. Just go cold turkey. It'll be fine. If you feel like you're a tough guy, like you're a real man. He was an old guy, so he was appealing to my masculinity. I'm like, all right, fuck it, I'll try it. So after the first day, I actually felt pretty good. The second day, I was so sick I couldn't get out of bed. It was that bad.
Really?
Like it was legit, like when you see a movie about a drug addict, like trembling on the floor in withdrawals, like it was literally that bad. So I had to start taking it because I needed to function. I had shit to do. I couldn't just tremble in bed for a week or two, So it's
like that movie.
It wasn't even
a movie Requiem for a Dream.
Yeah, it wasn't even a matter of being like addicted to it. Like I wasn't taking, it's not a drug you could get high off of. I was just physically addicted, and I could not stop taking it because I just couldn't function. So I used a method called bead counting. So you open up the pill, and it's got those little beads in there, and you take away a bead like once a week. You'll be like, okay, I'll take one bead out of the pill. Next week I'll take 2 beads out of the pill. So I did that for a long time to wean myself off of it. But maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that in the after hours. I don't know. But I mean, it's not, I don't think it's necessarily a case of people who are just trying to get high. Some of these drugs, when you stop taking them, they fuck you up. So you don't have a
Yeah.
choice. You have to keep taking them. And I've experienced that myself personally.
Yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense, yeah. So who did you say you're going to be doing? Brian Jones?
Brian Jones. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll skip that one then. All right. So, all right. The next one I have on my list here is the lead guitarist and singer. I'm sorry, leader and singer, co-founder of the band Canned Heat. I'm sure you probably remember Canned Heat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's they were always on the shelf next to Can of Whoop Ass.
Yeah. So at any rate, this fellow's name is Alan Blind Owl Wilson, and he was born on July 4th, 1943, died September 3rd, 1970 of a drug overdose. And that's actually, I think that as far as the cause of death, drug overdose is probably the most common one, or complications from a drug overdose, you know? So
Yeah,
I'll run through this a little bit here.
the ones I looked at, though, even though drugs were probably involved, sometimes there was a little bit of strange happenings as well. It wasn't just like
Yeah.
necessarily they took too much drugs and then they died. But you got to take that on a
Yeah,
case-to-case basis, though.
Well, and the next fella that I'm about to mention is a little bit of tomfoolery, I think, as far as the situation goes, of like how he died. So Jimi Hendrix,
Oh,
the
yeah.
legend
The legend.
himself, Jimi Hendrix, born on November 27th, 1942, died September 18th, 1970. And so at the time, he was hanging out with his girlfriend in London. I think it was London. And they're partying, hanging out and stuff, you know, and they had gone to a friend's house at like 2 a.m. to go hang out, you know, drink and probably, you know, do a little dope, what have you. They hung out there for a little bit, and then I guess his girlfriend made a scene, and for whatever reason, and they went back to their place, and they hung out for a little while. And at first, it said that, like I guess he had taken like an amphetamine pill at his friend's house. So he was having trouble getting to sleep, even though they were, you know, drinking alcohol and stuff and smoking weed, you know. So his girlfriend ended up giving him some sleeping pills. And at first, she claimed that she didn't want to give him the sleeping pills, you know, she resisted, but she ended up giving in. But it said that she gave him 9 of these sleeping pills, and I'm sure I could find it out somewhere. I don't know exactly what kind of sleeping pill it was. But at any rate, so and I mean, that's a shitload of freaking sleeping pills.
Who the
I would
fuck
have to
takes 9
imagine.
sleeping pills?
9 sleeping pills, dude, and you're also drinking and smoking and stuff, and I mean the confusion your body must be going through, especially even after taking an amphetamine pill a couple hours earlier. You know,
Yeah.
like your body must have been confused as crap. You know, it didn't know what to do with itself. So at any rate, they fall asleep. She says she wakes up later and finds him, you know, unresponsive, and you know, like she couldn't get him to wake up and stuff. So she calls an ambulance. But at this time, from what I understand, he basically vomited and choked on his own vomit. So
Yeah.
asphyxiation was the basic way he died. So like, but at the same time, like if you're his girlfriend, shouldn't you have noticed that? Wouldn't you notice him like vomiting and choking on his vomit? Wouldn't you just like lay him on his stomach, or at least put him on his side or something? You know,
Well,
I don't know. That's the weird part to me. That's one of them.
that is weird, but she was probably like really, really high herself, so she was not in her right state of mind. Maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know. But
Yeah, that's definitely possible.
it does seem strange. If somebody is choking and vomiting, your natural instinct is to try and help them, to get them. It might not be to get them to lie on their side or stomach, but at the very least, you're going to try to get them to sit up. You're going to try to help clear their air passage or whatever. You're not going to just sit there and watch them choke to death. So that is kind of a strange one.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next legend on the list is the great Jim Morrison.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
As everybody knows, Jim Morrison was a lead singer of the wildly successful band The Doors. a legend in his own right, and for very good reasons. Dude was very talented, a very iconic individual, even to this day, still very iconic. I mean, you still, like, say if you're in LA or something, you still see people walking around with Doors shirts on, you know? So, I mean, it's pretty impressive what he was able to accomplish and what he was a part of as being the lead man there for the Doors. So, all right, so Jim Morrison was born December 8th, 1942, and he died July 3rd, 1971 of heart failure. And most suspect that he was basically under the influence of heroin, and he was mixing up all sorts of different drugs, whatever. But mostly his favorite drug was heroin. So it's pretty much likely that he had heart failure due to heroin, but we don't really know because he was in Paris, France at that time, and France law doesn't dictate that you have to have, an autopsy done after a death necessarily, unless the court tells you to or something. So that's why we don't know exactly the cause of death with Jim Morrison. But I'll go through a couple more of these here. Let's see.
Another one I'd like to mention, though, attached to Jim Morrison is what was her name? His girlfriend. So let me just double check my notes here for. So her name was Pamela Susan Corson. So she actually was in his will, and she inherited his money, all his stuff basically, and she died a couple of years later, also at the age of 27. Kind of weird.
Dun dun dun.
That's just. Oh, you could do a whole nother little thing on her but I mean, we'll move on. But I just wanted to throw that out there because that's too weird, man. It's just too weird. What are the chances? He dies.
That is crazy.
He dies at 27. She inherits all his stuff, his wealth, his worldly goods, all the stuff. And then she dies at 27. It's crazy.
That is quite the coincidence.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt there. I had to had to mention her.
No, that was an important note to actually make that I kind of glanced through, forgot about. Excuse me. No, I had to burp there. I'm drinking some Sammy Adams. All right, so the next person I have on my list here is soul singer Linda Jones. She was born December 14th, 1944, and she died March 14th, 1972. And basically, she died while in a diabetic coma. So it's complications due to her being in a diabetic coma. So I don't know. Maybe she was drinking too much orange juice or something. I don't know. But the next one is the guitarist, lead guitarist for the Stone the Crows. And his name was Leslie Harvey, born September 13th, 1944. Died May 3rd, 1972. And this is kind of a weird one. He died from electrocution.
Wow.
That's never a fun way to go. I've been electrocuted before myself in a couple different ways, and some of them were stupid, but very painful. But at least, if you survive, once it's over, it's over. But I thought that was kind of a weird one.
Yeah.
The next one, Rob McKernan from the band Grateful Dead, which is, I've always been a fan of. I'm not a Deadhead, I would say, but I've always enjoyed their music. At any rate, he was born September 8th, 1945, died March 8th, 1973, from gastrointestinal hemorrhage. That doesn't sound fun.
That does not sound fun at all.
I blew my ass out. Ugh.
Yeah.
Anyways, next one.
Got some of that old pink sock action going on there, huh?
Oh, no. That's going too far. You just went too far.
Even for ETA, that's too far.
the visuals there that I have, growing in my mind. Ugh. Okay, so then
shout out to ATT on that one. But,
yeah. So the next one I have here on my list is a singer of the band called Bloodstone, Roger Lee Durham. He was born February 17th, 1946, died July 27th, 1973, from injuries that he sustained while riding horseback. So he fell off of his horse, and from what I understand, he has some like internal bleeding and internal injuries, and he ended up dying from that. Guess they didn't get him to the hospital fast enough. But the next one I have here is the bassist for the Stooges, Dave Alexander. Why did I pronounce him like that? Dave Alexander, not deer. Anyways, I'm not Swedish. Sorry. He was born on June 3rd, 1947, died February 10th, 1975 of pulmonary edema. I didn't even look at what the hell is pulmonary edema.
Isn't that like a stroke? Let's see.
It's something like that. Well, fuck, I don't know.
I got the googly machine here, so I'll check it out.
I'm what most people refer to commonly as an idiot.
Pulmonary edema. Let's see here. Pulmonary is a condition caused by too much fluid in the lungs. Okay, I was way off.
Oh, okay.
This fluid collects in the many air sacs of the lungs, making it difficult to breathe. In most cases, heart problems cause pulmonary edema, but fluid can collect in the lungs for other reasons, according to mayoclinic.org. I don't know any more than that. That's all I have.
Oh, okay. Well, the last one, I don't want to keep on going on too long with these simple lists here, but the last one I'll mention is the keyboardist and guitarist from the band Badfinger, Pete Ham. He was born April 27th, 1947. He died April 24th, 1975 from suicide. And I mean, there's so many more people on the list and stuff.
Yeah.
Some of them definitely seem like it's like a mix between drug overdoses and suicide, and there's different stuff sprinkled within the mix there.
Yeah,
but it seems like the vast majority of them are either suicide or drug overdose.
There are so many of these. It's actually kind of surprising when you start looking. It's more than just Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin and Jim Morrison. Like there's a ton, a surprising amount. But all right, well, I guess I'll talk about a little bit about my notes got messed up here. Okay, Brian Jones. Sorry, I hit a wrong button and it just messed up. My notes scrolled way to the bottom. All right, so we'll talk about Brian Jones, who also is a member of the 27 Club. He is a founding member of the Rolling Stones, probably just about the biggest group ever. I don't know if you're going to look at record sales or whatever, but how many bands can sell out stadiums everywhere they go? Not that many, and the Rolling Stones is one of them. Still to this day, if they went on a tour, they would sell out. They're huge. One of the
only bands I think they could compete with them. I mean, there are other bands, but maybe the Beatles. I mean, Beatles were bigger. Elvis was bigger, but not much.
Yeah. They're in a pretty rare category of true super stardom. So Brian Jones was one of the founding members. He played guitar, he wrote their songs, and he was also a producer. He lived from 1942 to 1969. And of course, as you might imagine, he got caught up in drugs. He was addicted to various things, and at one point it got so bad that he was kicked out of the band. It was, I guess alcohol was one of the big ones there. He was just so messed up that, when they'd go to record, he basically was not able to play his instrument anymore. And they had to let him go because, studio time's expensive and you got to get shit done. And he could not get it done. So they unfortunately had to let him go. And less than a month after he was kicked out of the band, he was found dead in his swimming pool at his home, apparently having gone swimming while high on a mixture of alcohol and downers and possibly some other stuff. But there are some question marks surrounding his death. Here's a quote from Keith Richards, who is also a guitarist still to this day of the Rolling Stones. Keith Richards said, "And still the mystery of his death hasn't been solved. I don't know what happened, but there was some nasty business going on." So just, his bandmates don't think that it was an accident. They don't think that it was an overdose and that he went swimming and died naturally or whatever. He lived in a farm, the Crotchford Farm, which was a 16th century farmhouse. And just a little interesting factoid is that house had previously been owned by the author of Winnie the Pooh, And certain locations in that story, like the 100-acre woods or whatever, were based on that property. I guess the property had 100 acres, for example, which is, kind of a fun little detail. So Jones got the house originally because he was living in London and he was being harassed constantly by Norman Pilcher, who was a Scotland Yard police sergeant. And they were really, really going after musicians and celebrities for drugs. This is something that the older establishment saw as a threat to society, and they were really going after people for it. And Jones was so sick of being constantly harassed that he decided to buy a house out in the middle of friggin' nowhere just to get away from it all, to get some peace and quiet so he could get high without being harassed, You're marshing my mellow, man. All right, so he hired a handyman through Tom Keylock, who was this shadowy figure that supplied drugs to the Stones and had connections to the underworld, the criminal underworld. That's who he hired the handyman through. But the construction crew was led. The construction crew was led by a dude named Frank Thorogood. And he and his construction crew apparently moved into the house and just partied a bunch, basically taking advantage of Jones's wealth and celebrity, and they would just do as they pleased. They made themselves at home. I can imagine, if you're in this construction crew, you're going out to a bar and you're like, hey, lady, guess what house I'm staying at? Why don't you come back? We're having a party, Perfect pickup line, I could only imagine the shenanigans that ensued. But they weren't getting a whole lot of work done. They were causing trouble. Jones had went there for peace and quiet that he was not getting because of the construction crew who were causing all sorts of ruckuses. So he got fed up and kicked them out on July 2nd. And he was found dead after midnight on July 3rd, very, very shortly thereafter. Coincidence? I don't know. Pretty weird, though. He was found in his pool, like I said, having apparently drowned, but the coroner's report changed from drowning to death by misadventure. Whatever the hell that means, I don't know. Apparently, the autopsy showed that he had about 3 pints of beer in his system, as well as some uppers and downers, which it sounds bad, but he was a seasoned drug addict, and also apparently he was a strong swimmer and in fairly good physical condition. Dude, anybody in their 20s is in fairly good physical condition, let's be real. But I mean, he was reported to be a very good swimmer. And like, for your seasoned addict, 3 pints of beer is nothing. That is not even an appetizer. That is a drop in the bucket. That's when they're thinking about getting drunk. They'll take a whiff of alcohol by drinking 3 pints of beer. That's when they're just thinking about warming up. That's nothing. That is nothing to a seasoned alcoholic. So, if he had about 3 pints of beer in his system, I don't know if that would cause him to drown if he went swimming. It doesn't really add up. Also, apparently, he had fresh water in his lungs that was different than the pool water. So it was not the pool water, it was just fresh, clean water. Kind of weird. There was a trough of fresh water near his garden, and some people speculate that he was drowned in that trough. And later analysis determined that his heart tissue was stressed, which would indicate that he was struggling at the time of his death, as if somebody was holding his head underwater, maybe. It was not something that would happen if he just went unconscious and drowned. They wouldn't cause that kind of stress, apparently. I don't know. I'm not a doctor or whatever, so I can only take somebody else's word with it, but it's still pretty interesting. The witnesses that were there have conflicting statements, and we're not even 100% sure how many witnesses were there. Some versions of the story say that there were only 3 other people there when he died, his girlfriend and 2 others. So Anna Warlin, Janet Lawson, and Frank. Other testimonies say that some crew members, Tom Keylock and Suki Portier, who was his ex-girlfriend, were also there. That one is probably a little bit more likely, but who knows? There are other things involved in this case, too. There's a lot of politics going on at the time. And police used his death as an example, well, the government really used his death as an example of what would happen if you weren't good boys and girls. If you started listening to rock and roll and taking drugs, you would end up dead in a pool just like this guy. That's kind of how they spun the story. That was kind of the end of it back then. It was pretty much just sort of left on the wayside. The police didn't want anything to do with it because the police and a lot of more, I guess, conservative society who were not into the rock and roll scene saw him as a degenerate, and they didn't really care about how he died. It did not really matter to them that much. But over the years, the story has developed a little bit. The case has been opened and closed 3 times over the years by the police, and other things have come out that have been kind of interesting. For example, it turns out that at one point, Frank beat his girlfriend nearly to death, possibly because she wanted to talk to the police. Anna Wolin said, here's a quote, "I don't know if Frank meant to kill Brian. Maybe it was horseplay in the pool that went wrong, but I knew all along he did not die a natural death. I'm still sure of it." That's kind of an interesting quote there. Tom Keylock came out many years later and said that he was there that night, and his brother, Frank Keylock, who was an officer at Scotland Yard, hold on, record scratch, isn't Tom Keylock the underworld shadowy figure guy? Kind of weird that his brother is a cop. But Frank told Tom that it was a cover-up job. And here's a quote, "I think the police wanted to make a manslaughter charge, but they were told to forget it. The only one who could possibly have been charged was Frank Thorogood, because he was the only one in the pool, but police said just forget it. The orders came from the very top not to pursue it anymore, and it never was pursued after that." We don't know why. We can only speculate. Was it politically motivated? In other words, they wanted to make an example of him, don't do drugs and play guitar or you'll end up dead in a pool. Or was there corruption at the very highest levels of government and they didn't want it investigated because that could potentially out people who are corrupt? I don't know. It's, we can only speculate. We don't know for sure, but it's kind of interesting just to think about it. At the very least, there definitely appears to have been some shenanigans afoot. Other than that, we don't really know. Keylock also said that Frank confessed on his deathbed. He said, "It was me that did Brian. I just finally snapped." That's what Keylock said that Frank said on his deathbed. And, did Brian would be obviously not a sexual term, but a term that he murdered him. But it turns out that Keylock maybe might have more to do with it than you think, because he probably covered up something himself. He was witnessed burning lots of personal papers at Brian's house, and he took a lot of Brian's really expensive stuff from around the house, including his Rolls Royce that he somehow ended up with. So that's another angle. You're like, well, you don't just take somebody's Rolls Royce. That's a little bit suspicious. I don't know. All the witnesses are unfortunately passed away by now. Tom Keylock, interestingly enough, died 40 years to the day after Brian did, on July 2nd, 2009. Coincidence? I don't know. Kind of an interesting number. We'll probably never know for sure, but I have put this one on the list because I only had a chance to look into it a little bit. I didn't have a chance to do the deep dive, and there seems to be quite a lot going on in this case, easily enough to do a whole episode on, and I want to know more. What more can I find out about this case? There's definitely a lot of weird stuff going on here. Just a little epilogue. Pilcher, the sergeant, the guy who was harassing Brian, was actually eventually convicted of conspiracy to pervert justice in 1972 because he was harassing the shit out of people, and sentenced to 4 years in prison. But he said that, hey, it wasn't me. I'm not corrupt. I'm not a bad guy. I was actually just following orders from up top, which, given the political climate and just how much certain parts of society absolutely hated other parts of society, it's believable. I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know. But, if you look back at anecdotes from the time, like, for example, the Beatles having long hair, and I don't know, have you've heard of this, Agent ETA?
What, their mop tops were a bad influence kind of thing?
Well,
or?
People would complain about them having long hair and looking like hippies and stuff. I don't know. It was just a strange time back then. But anyways, that's like the short version of this case, and I hope to look into it again in the future. So that's just a little bit of the 27 Club. We don't have time to go into that much detail for each and every single victim, but quite a lot of them died under unusual circumstances. Not necessarily as unusual as Brian or Robert Johnson. Those are two of the ones that really caught my attention, which is why I talked about them. But still, a lot of weird stuff happened. So let's get into some of the major theories. What's behind the 27 Club? Do you have any thoughts or ideas on what could be the cause? Is it just a synchronicity? What do you think, Agent ETA?
Mama said 27 Club, the devil.
Yeah. Mama said alligators is ornery because they have, what was it, too much teeth or something? I don't know.
I forget.
They got all them teeth or something. I forget what it is. Yeah. Oh my God. That movie,
I don't know.
That movie is so stupid and
movie.
yet so entertaining at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's there's a lot of quotable lines from that. Yeah. But yeah, as far as the 27 Club goes, like, I don't know, like, I think it might be one of these cases where a lot of these people made a deal with the devil to become as talented as they did become. And maybe they didn't become as influential as someone like Robert Johnson, but they still pay the price nonetheless,
Yeah. That is one of the major ideas, is selling the soul to the devil. Some other ideas out there are that there was just some sort of karma involved. Maybe these people did something bad and deserved it, or maybe their fame rose too quickly. They got too close to the sun, kind of a thing. Skeptics say that statistically, actually, that the number of musicians that die at age 27 is in line with what you would expect from the general populace. However, I don't know if they're including all musicians, because there's a lot of musicians out there. You know what I mean? But it seems like very, very famous musicians, if you narrow it down to that subset, maybe the numbers would be a little different. So I take that one with a grain of salt. I don't know. There's a ton of other ideas out there. For example, in numerology, 27 reduces to 9, and 9 has something to do with the end of a cycle. And when the cycle ends, that can cause bad things for people sometimes, I guess. I don't really understand that one, but there's a bunch of stuff like that out there. There's a whole lot of different theories, but the main theory is basically, like ETA said, selling your soul to the devil to get fame. And then, at some point you have to pay for that. But I think also, if you're going to sell your soul to the devil, you have to be clever about it, because Jimmy Page did it, and he didn't die at 27. So is he still around? I think he's still around, right?
Yeah. As far as I know, I don't think he's passed away.
I haven't heard of him passing away. Let's see. You look at Wikipedia, James Patrick Page is an English musician. Yeah, so he's still around. If Wikipedia says is, then he's still around. Yeah, so I mean, he sold his soul to the devil, and he is still alive and kicking, alive and well. So you got to be really good at your negotiation skills, or just don't do it at all, because what's fame good for anyways? If you can't go to the grocery store and shop for groceries without being harassed by fans, I don't know, dude, that's got to be pretty stressful. I would not like that. If every time you run outside every time you leave your house, you're running up to you, trying to grab hair off your head and steal your clothes as a souvenir or whatever, that's got to get stressful. I don't know.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess that's all we got for you on the 27 Club. I don't really have any final thoughts on this one. It's just weird. Maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe there's something supernatural going on here. But as far as I could find, I didn't really see anything that convinced me one way or the other. But there are an awful lot of them that died in strange ways, bizarre deaths and that kind of thing. Also, a lot of drug addicts. So maybe the more famous you are,
Yeah.
the more money and free time you have, the more likely you are to die of a drug overdose. I don't know. Any final thoughts, Agent ETA?
Yeah, I think that's likely. A lot of these people, like we were talking about before, a lot of them were drug overdoses. And I mean, if you have access to limitless amounts of drugs and you also have enough money to be high all the time, you're probably likely to overdo it at some point, you know?
Yeah.
So a lot of these deaths don't surprise me, you know?
Yeah, especially a handful of these individuals were known for kind of going overboard, you know. And there's some that we didn't even mention, like one of the more recent ones, Amy Winehouse, which we didn't even talk about her, but that's a whole lot. I mean, there's this one we could go on quite a lot longer, but I think it's I don't know, good time to wrap it up. So, all right, thank you guys so much for listening. If you'd like to help us out, you could do so by suggesting the show to your friends, giving us a good review, and liking the show wherever you listen. Until next time,
Keep it strange.